Now we're on the top of Chav Gimel and Beis. Kenegdo Nami Lo Boy. They didn't require to read 3 psukim in a Navi, and they get Kriyas HaMaftir b'Torah. So in other words, we're going to read 21 psukim in Navi, and that number 21, which is the minimum number of psukim for the Maftir b'Navi, corresponds to the number of psukim that we're obligated to read in the Torah for 7 kruim, with each one reading 3 psukim, 3 psukim for 7 kruim. 3 times 7 is 20, is 21. So they didn't require another 3 psukim in the Navi, again, to correspond to the Kriyas HaMaftir, because the Maftir is only a segue into the Haftarah b'Navi. So now we're using the word Maftir the way we're familiar with the word Maftir. Maskif la Rava, the Brisa says that there shouldn't be less than a 21 psukim requirement in Haftarah. Hare, let's take the Haftarah from Parshas Tzav, which we read from Yomi Perek Zayin. Olo sechem sufu, tol havyon esrim b'char. There are less than 21 psukim in that Haftarah. The Karina, and yet we don't hesitate to read that Haftarah. And Gemara says, "Shani hasam nisol kinyana." That Haftarah is different because you have a complete unit that makes up less than 21 psukim. Normally, we say that the minimum number of psukim that make up a unit of a conceptual unit that's integral is 21. But in this particular case, in Yirmiyah Perek Zayin, or L'Seichem Sfu, there you have a full entity, a full sugya, so to speak, which is called the Gemara's language Solik Yana, with less than 21 psukim. I'm going to prove to you that we can have a Haftarah that's less than 21 psukim and lo Solik Yana. It didn't have a complete self-contained independent unit. Many times, Havi Ka'imna, Kamid Rabbi Yochanan, I was standing in front of Rabbi Yochanan during Kriyas HaTorah and Haftarah. V'chi Havi Karina Nasara Psuke. Once they read 10 psukim in the Haftarah, Amalan Afsik. They told us, Lahafsik. That's enough. And he didn't make any qualification that it's only in the case of Sistayim in Yonah. Even in the case of lowest time, you're in the middle of a parsha, in the middle of a sugya. So the Gemara's kash is now, it seems that even the low solik in Yonah, after 10 psukim, Rav Shmuel said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that that's enough. 10 psukim is your minimum amount, even if it's low solik in Yonah. So Gemara answers, Makom sheish turgum on China. Now the Gemara has another exception to the rule of requiring a minimum of 21 psukim. The first exception was solik in Yonah. But now, even if it's low solik in Yonah, we have another exception to the rule, and that is if there's a turgumon. And we're going to calculate the psukim of the turgumon as if it was read in the Haftarah itself. And it means after each pasuk in Navi, there was a metargem who would translate into the local vernacular, in this case, Aramaic, the Tani Rab Katlifa, Bar Shmuel, Lo Shanu. This did that we require a minimum of 21 psukim for the Navi, Ela b'makom she'ein turgumon. Avo b'makom she'esh turgumon posek. So if you have a turgumon who's translating the psukim of the Navi, then you could end the Haftarah earlier, even though there's less than that minyan of psukim, that minimum 21 psukim that are necessary. If you're going to require 21 psukim plus the Targum, that's already extending it too long. That's already Torah Chatzim. And this leads us to one of the most famous Mishnayos in Shas, which is called Ein Darish V'Keducha Pachos Me'asara. And the Mishnah is now going to list and enumerate all those that come under the category of what? Of Darish V'Keducha. Number one, Ein Person Al Shema. So there was a minhag back then in the day where they recited half of the brachas of Kriyat Shema on behalf of someone who came late to shul. We call it like a Heichik Kedusha, but then it was a slightly different kind of thing. If somebody missed the davening, then that's a relief. Then we're going to allow him to read half of the brachas of Kriyat Shema. The Ein Ovrim L'fnei HaTeva. Now we need Chazar Sashatz. That also requires Asara. The Ein Nosin Es Kapeyim. There's no such thing as Birchas Kohanim without Asara. Again, we wonder why the Mishnah had to spell that out. I mean, Birchas Kohanim requires Chazar Sashatz. You've already told me that Chazar Sashatz requires Asara. So therefore, ipso facto, there's no possibility of Mesias Kapayim without a framework of Tefillah. So when would there be a possibility of Birchas Kohanim with less than Asara? He says the following. I'm reading you the footnote. Afal Pisha Birchas Kohanim Nemeretz B'chazar Sashliach Tzibur Ukfar Shmiyanu Atana She'ein Shliach Tzibur Choser B'Tfilah Elam Yesh Asara Atana Lashmiyenu. What's the chiddush of the Tana here? Kan She'ein Birchas Kohanim B'chlal Chazar Sashatz. V'afal Pishim Hiskil Shliach Tzibur Lachzos Atfil Chayu Hashem Asav Yotzim Mitzosam Gomes Tfiloso Mikom Kom Ein Omrim Birchas Kohanim. Here's a case where you have Chazor Sashatz without Birchas Kohanim. When the Shliach Tzibur began repeating the Shemona Esrei, he looked around and he counted another 9 people. He's got a minyan. But then one person dropped out, and we're up to Birchas Kohanim. What should we do? The Mishnah tells me there's no Birchas Kohanim unless you have Asara. So really, in essence, Birchas Kohanim is a separate entity. It's not integral. It's not an integral part of Shemona Esrei, Tefillah, but that's where the Rabbanan formulated it. And even if that Tefillah could continue, because they started with a minyan, and you're allowed to finish when you started with a minyan, nevertheless, it's not a minyan for Birchas Kohanim. And beyond that, Ein Kohanim B'Torah, there's no such thing as Kriyas B'Torah, that's also Davar Shebekdusha. V'nekdashli B'Tov B'nei Yisrael. When the Torah is read publicly, that's a great Kiddush Hashem, and therefore it's a Davar Shebekdusha. They maftir b'Navi. This is a Kiddush. That when you have to be maftir b'Navi after the Kriyas HaTorah, you must maintain the minyan. I understand the Kriya itself requires a minyan, but now the Mishnah is being mechadesh that even the Haftorah b'Navi, which is after the Kriyas HaTorah, that also is a Davar Shebekdusha, and the Kriya, whether it's Kriya from the 5 books of Moses, or it's the Kriya from Tanakh, from the Via, it has the status of a Davar Shebekdusha. The Enosim Mamadu Moshav, right when they carry the dead for burial, so one of them would say, Shvu Yikarim Shvu, and they would sit down in order to cry and grieve over the loss. But let's say someone, for whatever reason, wants to be maspid the mess. When he gives the hesped, then the people are sitting. So that's what the word moshav means over here. Then at some point he says to them, Imdu Yikarim Imdu. And that's called Mamad. So we have Mamad and Moshe. The Ein Omrim Birchas Avelu. On Shabbos, during Avelus, they used to recite a bracha, and even after the Kvura, they recited a bracha. Gemara is going to explain what that bracha is. The Tanchume Avelu. When they leave the Beis HaKvaros in what's called a Shura, there will be Nicham Avelu. It's already after Kvura. Well, Birchas Chasanim, the 7 brachas that the Chasan recites during the 7 days of Mishteh after his wedding, B'chein, ein mezamin b'shem, and in order to say Birkas Hazim b'shem, Nevarach Elokeinu, b'pachos mi'asor. Less than 10, Anoshim simply will not do the trick. Now it's interesting because in the cases of Birchas Avelim, Tanchumin Avelim, and Birchas Sanim, and Zimun for sure, I would not classify those as a Davar Shebekdusha. And then you ask me the following question. So what's the source and what's the Yisod, the Shoreh, for requiring 10 people for something that's not a Davar Shebekdusha? And the answer is that there's something Bifar Hesya, something that requires a public statement. Like the Chassid says, I'm not marrying this woman like any other biological male and female, to an animal mates with. This is all Min HaShamayim. Hashem ish li'isha, the Gemara says. And that has to be publicly stated. And Zimun means that we are now gathering together for a public bracha of Hashem on the Muslim that he provided for us to sustain us. And in the case of Birchas Avelim, it's very possible that the requirement of a minyan is to be mefarsem what we call Tchias HaMesim. That although right now we're putting the dead into the ground, that's only like a pikadon. Like the Gemara says in Bava Kama, you take tzofim, you put it on the ground. But it'll come back out of the ground. And now we get to Shumas Karkos. When you have Hegdesh and somebody wants to be called a Hegdesh, we need Asar B'nai Adam to agree on a certain value of that karka that you're being podeh. And Tisha B'Kohen, amongst the 10 people who are involved in Shama'ut, right, in what they call assessing the value of karka, you need one Kohen. The Adam Keyotzim. In other words, when you're coming to be podeh an Adam from Hegdesh, that's called Erchin, and we do a Shuma in the presence of 10 B'nai Adam, one of them is a Kohen, and it has the status of Karka, same identical. Again, clearly this has nothing to do with the Davar Shebekdusha. It's just an issue of how to evaluate, the amount of money has to be podeh the Hegdesh. Minani Milu. What's the source for a Davar Shebekdusha? Amar Reb Chia bar Basar, right? Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Reb Yochanan di Amar Kra, v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. Kol Davar Shebekdusha lo yehei b'pachos meisara. Now, obviously, we're in total darkness here. I mean, Reb Chia is telling us that the source for Asara is v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. But how do you know that B'toch B'nai Yisrael requires Asara? Lo yei pachos me'asara. This is halacha Davar Shebekdusha, one of the most famous Gemaras in Shat. My mashma, so where do you see it in the post? The Tani Reb Chia, Asya Tov Tov, Pili Plana, we derive Asara from the 10 Meraglim. Shkoya. Ksiv Hacham Nikdash Tov B'nai Yisrael Ksiv Hasam. He badlu mitoch ha'eda azos. Stay away from this Eda. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe. Asya Eda. Now we have to know how much is an Eda. Okay, so V'nikdashi b'toch b'nei Yisrael means an Eda. Like it says, he badlu mitoch ha'eda. So we have Toch. So you don't really know that an Eda is necessarily 10 people, but the Tzif Chasam and Mosai Li'eda Ara Azos, in the context of Meraglim, it says, when is the Eda finally, I'm going to be punished, which they were punished severely. And that Eda is made up of 10 Meraglim, because Kolim and Yefunu were not part of the Eda Ra. It's Malal and Asar, Avkan Asar. Mishnah says, Eino Sigmamadu Moshe Pachos Me'asara. And why is that so? Came on the boiler Meimar Imdu Yikarim Amodu Shmu Yikarim Shmu is Botzim Me'asara Lav Orach Aram. It's not Derech Eretz to be Matriach, the Memuna, who's going to call out Yikarim. So the Memuna is the one who's designated to call out Yikarim Amodu, Imdu Yikarim Amodu, or Shmu Yikarim Shmu. And it's not derech eretz, latriach es hamamuna, lechanos es hamu'atim yikarim. Can't call a small group of people yikarim. Yikarim, if you have a minui, requires the shvach of merubin. He has here a note, and in this note, he says we're going to have to be patient, apparently, in order to understand an Osim Mamadu Moshav. Let's see if we go back for a minute. I know we're under the gun here, but just for a second, if we can finally get a grasp on this Mamadu Moshav, they're taking out the dead for burial, and one person's mamuna is going to call out Shvu Yikam Shvu. So they sit down, they cry, and they grieve over the loss. And now they're ready for a hesped. And the hesped continues while they're sitting down, and then they would declare Imdu Yikarim Imdu. What is that? I think it's a yud. Let's just see. Do you have perhaps you know what, let me look here second and see if possible. 12. I think he's saying we have to be patient. Ain't omer birchas avelin birchas chasan pumps me'asara. My birchas avelin birchas rechav. Right after the burial, they go out in the public. The Omer of Yitzchak, Omer of Yochanan birchas avelin basara. Vein avelin ben aminyan. We don't count the avelin because it's part of nichem avelin, so they're not being menachem themselves. Birchas chasan basara, b'chasan ben aminyan. But the chasan is mitzvah to the meaning of basara. Ein mezamen al mozon b'shem v'chos me'asara kevan deboy l'meim nevarech lelokeinu is batzir me'asara lav orachar. It's not derech eretz to mention the name of Hashem in less than the presence of asara. V'karkos tisha v'kohen 9 and a kohen in order to do the shuma for pidyon karka yodam kayotz. It says the word Kohen 10 times in the parsha that deals with and is dedicated to pidyon hegdish. And this is in Vayikra Perek of Zion. Shlosha nemer legavi adam shenoda loses is erko lehegdish. That's pasuk ches. The middle of a Kohen. The Herechos are Kohen, and Yarichenu are Kohen. Now we have another 3 in the case of Pidyon Behemas Hegdesh, when it's Psuli Amudosh Tzaroi Lakrova, that's Psukim Yud Aleph Yud Beis, the Imkol Behema Tmei Asher Le'akrivu Benu Karban Hashem, Behemedes Abemel Tnei HaKohen, Veherech HaKohen, and Ke'erech HaKohen Kein Yir. So that jacks up the number to 6. Now we have another 4 in the pidyon of Karka and Hegdesh. With regard to Batim, Pasuk Yudalad, it says, V'yish ki yigdash es beiso kodesh Hashem v'aricho ha-kohen. And then it says, Kasher yarech also ha-kohen. And then we have pidyon Stei Achuza in Pasuk Yudches. Another 2 times it says Kohen. V'im acharayovel yagdish sadeu v'choshelo ha-kohen. Es hakesav al pi hashna, etc. V'choshelo ha-kohen es michnas erka. Because we have 10 times that it says the word Kohen. Chad l'gufei. One time we needed to teach us that the shuma has to be done by a Kohen. He evaluates and assesses the value of the hegdesh. The idach, the other 9, Havi mir achar mir v'ein mir achar mir el rabbos. Even though it has another 9 times it says the word Kohen, but nevertheless it's a mir achar mir. We already were mismayit mitchila that the shuma has to be done by a Kohen and not by Israel. So that's from the first time it says Kohen. Why did the Torah have to exclude Yisrael another 9 times? And now we activate the principle of Ein Biyud Achar Miyud El Rabos, and that teaches us Tishi Yisrael V'chad Kohen. So where has to be Ema Chamisha Kohen V'chamisha Yisrael? We have a Miyud, but maybe the Miyud is only telling me that we should divide up into 2. We have 5 Kohanim and 5 Yisraelim. So the ribui here of Ein Biyud Achar Miyud El Rabos is to be Marba Yisrael. And the next one is not a miyut, but rather a ribui. So you go miyut, ribui, ribui, times 5, and you end up with 5 kohanim, 5 Yisraelim. Kasha as it doesn't end. The Adam Kayotze Adam has the same status as Karka, that the Shuma is Basara. Adam Mikadosh, when is man considered Hegdesh? He can't be Magdash a person. We're talking about a case of a person who took a neder to Hegdesh, that he will pay to Hegdesh his domin, you know, how much he's worth on the slave market. Tisanya Omer Domi Olai, Shamanos Eved. We evaluate his Eved Hanimkar B'Shuk value, and that domim he gives to Hegdesh. The Eved is Karkos. And once we have a hekesh between Eved and Karkos, we need Asara. Tirsiv, Visnachaltem Osam L'bneichem Achrechem L'reshes Achuzah. Pasuk Vayikra Perek Chafhei, and there's a hekesh in this pasuk between Avodim and a stay Achuzah. And therefore we need 10 people, one of them a Kohen, who should do the evaluation, not only in the case of Shumas Karkos, but likewise in the case of someone who declares Dami Olai. So Mirza Hashem, tomorrow we'll pick up the Mishnah here on the bottom of Daf Chav Gimel Amid Beis. Wish you a great day.